We have with us Dola Indidis, who is an advocate of the High Court, Martin Oloo, who is also an advocate of the High Court. We have Reuben Kigame, who is a Christian apologist. We do have with us James Kombo, who is the professor and acting, of course, VC of the Daystar University. Also, we have with us David Githugu, who is a minister, of course, from the Truth Quest. We continue with the conversation here, but we want to actually introduce the man himself who met that particular case at the International Court of Justice. This is Dola Indidis, to tell us more about this particular petition of his. So, Dola, tell us, since you actually filed this petition at the International Court of Justice, what has been the outcome? This is 5 years down the line.
First, I must say thanks to God for this day today. I must also say thanks to you for inviting us. I must say thanks to the fellow panelists for also availing their time. I must also say thanks to our people, because there has been a lot of concern about this case. Foremost, I also extend the Easter greetings to all of you, believers and unbelievers. I also want to give an upfront apology to anybody who may be offended by my comments that I may make here. I know that many people support me in this, and many people also do not support me, but that is not strange. The reason why I went was to set records straight. In courts, when you have matters and a conviction at the end of it, that conviction stays until it is set aside. If it is not set aside, it remains a conviction. It was therefore upon me as counsel to try to find out, and if I found fault or flaw in the process, to point it out so that it would be corrected, so that there would be a good precedent, because as we talk today, it's a bad precedent. I was more touched again because of the semblance of the Roman law and the Kenyan penal law. The Roman penal law and the Kenyan penal law are almost side by side, except for maybe arrangement of sections. As you are aware, Rome colonized Britain, and they took their law to Britain. Britain took that law to India, and then they later imported it here. So when I was looking at it, the law and the criminal procedure, it's so much similar to that we have in Kenya. And I felt it was upon me as counsel to point it out so that the court would eventually look at it. And if appropriately found, then the precedents will be corrected. The case that I had in mind was the case of Joan of Arc. A similar scenario, because Joan of Arc was also charged with blasphemy.
Thank you. I think we should leave it at that, because we shouldn't go to that particular case. You've actually laid the ground, and now we have the basis of this. We want to see if truly, yes, what you're raising with this petition is genuine, is germane, and of course was Jesus given, you know, the due process and a fair trial during that particular. So we want actually to engage the panelists. And of course, I want to begin with Reuben Kigame. Do you think Dola Indidis has, you know, a genuine case here, looking and of course hearing for what he has given us as a background, and looking at the Roman law then and now, do you think he has a genuine case?
Well, I don't know how one determines genuine or ingenuine. I would say he has an interesting case. Interesting case because I believe that issues regarding Jesus and what he claimed and so on must be thought about seriously. He himself challenged people, you know, who do men say I am? So I think he's raising some significant topic for the modern world to think about. However, I have two challenges with what he is doing. Number one, I have a problem with just trying to understand whether issues of religion and or morality can be legislated, and to what extent. Because wherever you have state and religion, for example, most constitutions will insist that the two are separate. And so there is an area that the state or the laws of the land cannot probe. And so that is one area I have a challenge with. But the second one is like it. The second one is to what extent can law actually deliver justice today if it didn't deliver then? The reason is that part of the admission by our brother here is that Pilate was not qualified. So one of the questions would be, who is qualified to hear this? What Pilate has done, if you're looking at the primary documents, yes, in for example, John 18:31, Pilate says, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." He's telling the Jews. The Jews had one law, the Romans had another law, and Jesus, in fact, is coming with a third law. And he says, "My kingdom is not of this world." So there is a kingdom, and where there is a kingdom, there is a king. It must be that there is a different law that is governing there. Maybe we would do well to concentrate more on what Jesus himself is trying to say in response to his own accusation.
Of course, as you know, I went on to become a lawyer, but didn't continue the practice, went into the ministry and became a pastor, and then stopped pastoring to go back into study and a quest for what is actually the whole truth, because there's so much that is in religion, but there's a lot that is also questionable in relation to the idea of truth. But coming to the trial of Christ, so that the young people can also identify, as the brothers have mentioned, the men here have mentioned, there's the religious people who tried him, that's the high priest and his council.
Yes.
There are the political people who tried him, that's Herod, who was governor over Judea and appointed by the Romans. There was Pilate, who was representing an empire that had conquered Judea and was reigning over them. And then there was the people themselves. And looking at it from a jurisprudential angle, if I can draw back from the time I was in legal practice, the religious people had direct jurisdiction in terms of like a magistrate's court, but it was limited to religious matters. But they could not execute without the approval of the state and governing authorities. That's why it went to Herod, and that's why it went to Pilate. So you may say that Herod may have had a superior jurisdiction, Pilate may have had an appellate jurisdiction like the appeal court. The people on this particular occasion, annually at this particular feast, were given a custom of being given the opportunity to determine who would be set free. So in that sense, you can see the early functioning of a jury model. So we might call them the mob, but actually they were acting on a custom that was in place to give feedback to Pilate on who would be set free. So the question as to whether these people actually had proper jurisdiction is hard to judge when you're looking at today and how our legal system is set up today and trying to judge whether they had proper jurisdiction compared to our time without first understanding the system that was there. But actually we should also remember, as one brother has mentioned, there was also a Supreme Court. The Supreme Court was invisible. The Supreme Court is in the heavens. And if you look at the book of Acts, when the first African we see recorded in the scriptures addressing the question of what happened to Christ, Philip talking to the Ethiopian eunuch, he's reading the prophecy of Isaiah. And what is actually quoted there in Acts is saying, Isaiah prophesied that he would be led like a lamb to the slaughter, and justice would suffer so that he could be sacrificed on behalf of the people. Just to put it differently, if I was to do a case today, I would really more focus on, so maybe more the question of what is the truth. I would prosecute a case on what truth versus lies. For example, I would prosecute a case about material misrepresentation today, about who is Christ. Is the depiction of Christ as a white person true? Or is he truly a dark-skinned, melanated person like I am? Is the representation of the Israelites as a Caucasian people, the people who are in Israel today, is that a false representation? And actually the true Israelites are dark-skinned people scattered throughout the earth. I would ask questions about why did he come? Why did he exist? What was his mission? How did he accomplish it? What did he institute? And is the form of religion we are practicing today what he came to establish, or have we lost something? I would prosecute a case against the propagators of a false narrative, material misrepresentation of what he is about and what he came to do. What do I mean by that? Who is Christ? What is the proper context for understanding what he came to do? For example, this question of saying the Old Testament is dispensed with, as the professor here has said, can we even understand who Christ is in the New Testament without reference to the Old? So those would be some questions in the quest of truth that I would prosecute today.
Genuine questions, and maybe we can come back to you, Reuben Kigame, that he raises. But because if we try and also get into that, there will be another debate all day long, but we'll look into that briefly. But looking at the case that we have here with Dola, and we're picking that, the Roman Empire and the system of jurisprudence. First of all, they say that no criminal trial could be carried through the night. And this particular trial was carried through the night. That was a violation, right, Kigame? Then, of course, two, the judges who condemned a criminal had to have a day in between before the execution, and they had to fast all day. They didn't. They killed Jesus the same day. That is another violation, right? Three, there had to be witnesses who witnessed against him. There was none. We didn't see any witness that actually was there. There had to be a defense. There was no defense for Jesus. Okay, there was not even any indictment. There was no arraignment. There was nothing. There was no crime, and many other compile a list of things they did to violate the laws that they themselves, of course, they've affirmed. So we know you said Jesus had 6 trials. They've taken us from Annas, Caiaphas, back to Herod as well. But was this also just to proffer the dead hand of bureaucracy so that they could legitimize this particular trial of Jesus? Let's hear from Reuben Kigame, and then we'll try and explore this. This was a total violation, and I don't know, maybe also Dola can tell us, do you have this also in your petition?
Okay, I would begin by agreeing with my brother, what's your name? David. That the big question we have to dwell on is truth. And interestingly, Pilate asks that question. What is truth? And then he walks out. He doesn't pause to listen to what Jesus would say, because Jesus goes on to, he's trying to tell Pilate, I came into the world to testify to the truth. Of course, I know there are the people like my friends from the Muslim faith who do not believe that that Jesus Christ was crucified, Surah 4, 157. And so there are people today who we must respect for holding a totally different view. But with the primary records completely in agreement that what David is calling a supreme court, a supreme law, was actually what was in charge of the activities, and it's not just at the trial here. The biggest issue I would want to raise with the current case, against Pilate and so on, is which court?
Jesus was violated. Jesus was unfairly, unjustifiably crucified. He was, the testimony and evidence that was brought against him was untrue. And where it was true, it was twisted. For example, there are many instances where Jesus did not call himself who, because he kept on asking, who do you think I am? Every time he was challenged. So there's a way in which, even though he was king, even though he was God himself, he did not keep on walking around calling himself so. So when that comes in, he says he said he was king of Jews. That's a false accusation, because he never said he was a king of Jews. He just said he was the Lord. I mean, he was the Father's son, and he was there before. So there is a place where the entire process is a violation. The entire process is untrue. Indeed, that is what the Bible, I mean, that's what Jesus was all about. That he never came in order to be found guilty, or he never had a guilt, or he never had a sin as to be proved as such. Rather, he was a clean, innocent person who then was condemned and crucified for what he never did.
But clean or innocent would have to be measured against something. So the question of asking is, if there was a violation of whose law? Because Jesus himself puts out another law, which he says must be fulfilled.
All right, but we need to hear from Dola himself, because then we'll come to you, Professor, because Dola, you've also questioned the mode of the questioning, of course, of this particular case. Where is it? You say you are challenging the mode of the questioning used during the trial, the prosecution, hearing, and sentencing, finally, of Jesus Christ. Do you think in any way, as you say, they gave him some lead-on questions so that maybe it could be, you know, a sort of a trap that you want to draw me into this vortex? Do you say that to the King of the Jews? Jesus was mealy-mouthed about that, but they say now he says he's the King of the Jews. We don't know where actually they picked out that. I don't know, Dola, you question that very briefly? Then we come to Professor.
Yes, I would. Violation. When brother asked, whose violation? Violation of his own rights was the first violation. I believe this was the first documented case of human rights abuse inside the courtroom. And that too, in the glare of the judge. The judge was looking at his rights being violated, and the judge did not do anything. If there was any human rights abuse, if there was any human rights violation, this was the first documented one. Mm-hmm. So it is not only that. When my brother also talks about conflicts of law, the Jews themselves had the mode of death as stoning. They used to stone, not to crucify. Crucifixion was a Roman mode of execution. So even if you look at it, and even Paul, when Paul first went before the same court, Paul said, "No, I'm a Roman. You cannot try me. You have no jurisdiction." And indeed, he had, and he did not go ahead. And in the case of Jesus, then, if he did not have jurisdiction initially, then where does he draw the jurisdiction a second time when he's brought for the second time? So what I was saying, you have no jurisdiction, and your hands are tied. Whatever you do when without jurisdiction is bad in law. It has no force of law. It is null and void. That is what I was saying. And the judge himself, although he looked helpless, a judge takes oath to defend the law.
All right.
He did not defend the law.
He did not defend the law.
He is instead asking the accusers, what do I do with this man? The issue of jury is not a new concept in our system.
But the issue of jury, of course, everything, the judicial system that we have currently, and I think, you know, the legal minds that I hear, David and of course Martin, you can allude to this, that is predicated on, of course, from the Bible, yeah, with the judges. You know, the way you set up the justice system, all of that is actually predicated from the Bible itself. Isn't that the case? But let's hear from Professor Kombo.
I think one thing that appears common to us, and we appear to be saying it, all of us, is that there was injustice.
There was injustice.
There was violation. And, you know, you look at it right from the start of the week. You know, by Tuesday, after Jesus enters Jerusalem on Sunday, by Tuesday, Judas is contracting, is having a contract with the Sanhedrin.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, the Sanhedrin would be the Jewish court. The Sanhedrin is the Jewish court. That is, at the head of that is the high priest. These are 70 people. Actually, it's between 70 and 72.
Mm-hmm.
They conspire to contract Jesus to betray, Judas to betray Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And they know it. So right from the start, there is something we are not seeing. We are not seeing the conspiracy which the court has put together.
Mm-hmm.
So the court itself has conspired to do injustice to Jesus.
Yes.
And they do that right from the start of the week. So that by the time Jesus is arrested on on Thursday night, enough conspiracy has already happened.
So the sentencing was already determined?
It was.
Yeah, before
it was
actually...
already determined. It was already determined.
How does that reflect in our day and age? And ask, what are the dominant narratives in our day that are actually now coming into question? And what is the truth? Are we willing to engage those questions about the dominant narrative? For example, in the last 20 years, it's become a very big conversation which a certain generation may miss out on and be unaware that is taking place about a dominant narrative. Is Easter actually a biblical festival, or is it an historical pagan festival? And who made it Christian? Because it existed thousands of years before Christ came. So if Christ was part of a festival, which festival was that and how did it disappear so that today we're talking about Easter and not Pasach and the feast of unleavened bread? So what happened? Who changed this dominant narrative? And who isn't that person the one we should be prosecuting for changing the story?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to say this should help us.
We should bring it to perspective.
Yeah,
right?
but I have a problem right there, because we could end up attacking a straw man. If I belong to Kenya, I will be judged by the laws of Kenya.
That's right.
If I'm a Ugandan, I'll be judged by the law of Uganda.
That's right.
And so if I go back to the test, because we are looking at all these different narratives, but we are neglecting the central narrative by the man himself.
That's right.
What does Jesus say? John 18 from verse 36 now. Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jews. But now, my kingdom is from another place." "You are a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You are right in saying I am a king. In fact, for this reason I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth." And he concludes by saying, everyone on the side of truth listens to me. So his kingdom is really about truth. So here is a Jewish kingdom. Here is a Roman kingdom that has colonized the Jews. And here is Jesus' kingdom, which is not of this world. And so if we are going to discuss anything about the legality, the criminality, the injustice, we would have to ask by which kingdom. I would prefer that we use the kingdom that Jesus, the accused, is propagating.
All right.
Because that gives us a clue into how we gauge justice or injustice.
Okay. Then the question also would be then, if this particular case that Dola is actually pushing the envelope for, if he gets compensation, does it lose also the essence of the ransom that Christ made for humanity? right? That he himself was a ransom. Yes. So he get the compensation. No, Dola, I want to see the end game of this. For yourself, you come. If you get now, I don't know, $1 million check that will transcend, I don't know, from the shekels.
I hope
and
he
we
can
have
share
the,
with us.
Into the, and the dollars today. Will we lose? No. Will humanity lose the salvation that actually Jesus was seeking on the cross? And if you get that particular compensation, then how do you redeem? Because that was the sole element of actually.
But Debarl, that's where I take up from where Githugu was.
Yes.
About who transformed the previous feast into what we call Easter.
No,
I'm coming to that. I'm coming.
Let's not mix issues.
I'm coming.
Yes, okay.
I'm coming.
Okay, fine.
The answer is Jesus himself, because he then said, it is finished. The old order is gone, a new order has come. So back to again where Reuben is saying that as long as we are looking at this from a human, from an earthly perspective, then the questions Dola is asking are important. But as soon as you look at it from the spiritual and from God's own supremacy, then the answer of ransom is already sorted out, because Jesus was a ransom.
Jesus was a ransom.
Yeah. So that in his dying, he was a sacrifice to save the world. So then there is nothing else that we need to be talking about.
Yes.
Not even compensation.
So we should ask Dola.
Yeah.
What is the end game? Of this particular, exercise or this particular petition? Because Jesus is a ransom. You allude to that, isn't it? That he was crucified to die for your sins, isn't it? And of course, you are a staunch, committed Christians as well.
Yes.
Now, if you're given this compensation, where will be your salvation if he is a ransom?
Personally, I have not asked for compensation.
You've not asked for compensation?
No. But if the court would find it fit to grant, to award anything, because the court can always, in its own
it can declare.
wisdom, award cost. The Pope can take care of that.
We can go to Israel and look for
descendants
of Jesus.
But what I was saying,
Yes.
there is something that my brother says about the Old Testament and the New Testament. Jesus said he was coming to merge, to accomplish, so that the old and the new merge.
Yes.
And then in him, he also said one thing. When we think about why he had to die, yes, he came to die, he died. But I was saying, the dying was not legal. He came to die, and even himself, he asked those ones who came to arrest him, why do you come to arrest me at night, armed with all this manner of crude weapons, as if you are coming to arrest a criminal? He questioned his own arrest. It was not lawful. And then to the judge, he says, you have no jurisdiction to try me. He said so. Did he not say? Mm-hmm. But what the thing, the mystery, the dichotomy of it is that the judge at that time did not know that he ought not to have put his fingers in that. But his wife cautioned him. Pilate's wife cautioned him. He says, today you are going to go to court. There's a man who will be brought before you.
Inspired by a dream which cannot be tried in law.
Yes, but a fact which is on record. He says, have nothing to do with that man. That is what the wife saw. And interestingly, when Pilate later looked back, did you know that when Judas committed suicide, Pilate also later committed suicide? Why? The guilt. But what we are saying, why did I go to court? I went to court because the death of Jesus should not have been a judicial process. The judges should not have put their seal and hand on that. They should not have legalized it. Jesus should have died the way they killed Stephen. He should have been killed by the crowd. He should have been lynched. That could not have negated the issue of salvation at all.
Would it not violate his rights that you're defending?
It would not.
If he was lynched.
If he was lynched,
Yes.
to a fair hearing?
Yes. If he was lynched, I would not have gone to court.
I would.
If he was lynched.
Personally, I would.
But
Because
if he was lynched,
on the
if it had followed the proper process within the
Jewish law.
Jewish law, the Israelites' law, or in the kingdom of Judah, he would not have been stoned, because he would not have been found guilty, because he was innocent. And so these violations actually were foretold that they would take place in order to sacrifice an innocent man, that he might become a ransom on behalf of the Israelites who had violated the covenant with with God. So the violations that he's documenting are actually real violations that took place. But what we are trying to say is that those violations were seen from before, and they were proof and evidence
and they were necessary
of the wickedness of the people who were in those offices, as being people who would not uphold truth or righteousness.
Thank you.
According to the laws, even the Roman laws that they were under.
Let me ask a pointed question also to maybe the legal minds and of course the apologists here. Let's begin with Reuben Kigame. So does God then violate, you know, so to speak, you know, the rule of man to orchestrate his own purpose? Of course, the law of man on the
violate?
I said violate in quotes with the scarecrow. With understanding, that's what actually I'm picking on the apologists to defend this. Does God violate our rule of law that we have earthly? Of course, him is over and above the rule of man, so to speak. But if he really wants to come and advance his purpose, then how does it do it?
I'm appalled by the possibility that the God we are evoking would do a violation. So I wouldn't.
But I've put it with a scarecrow. Yes, the scare quotes, actually, the scare quotes are there.
Once it goes through that, I have no answer for you, because if he is God, then a violation is a contradiction of his own character. However, I think it is important to mention that the sovereignty and the wisdom of God accommodates aspects that are not necessarily everyday consideration for man. You know, what good could come out of the death of Jesus? I mean, purchasing salvation for all by one man dying. And so it brings about the possibility that God supersedes what may be uncomfortable or painful for man. And he has done that again and again. The story of Joseph, where he says that, you know, Joseph says, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good, to save many, many lives. Paul asks God about his thorn in the flesh 3 times. And God says, Paul, I'm not taking it away. And then he says, my grace is sufficient for you. The thing I'm pointing to is that pain, suffering, and that includes the cross, becomes a tool that God can use for salvation and the manifestation of his will. John 9, the man born blind, dichotomy again. Is it his own sin or parents' sin? Jesus says neither. And so there is always God's perspective, because it could be above. And so I would conclude by saying the entire scripture is littered with this particular message, almost like a scarlet thread, because at the end of the day, it's actually impossible, for example, to know you know, the character of God as human beings minus the pain. Because, for example, how does he comfort us unless we're discomforted? How does he wipe away tears that were never cried? How do we know him as a provider unless we've lacked? And so some of those are like parallel things that God uses mysteriously in his own creation to be able to showcase his power. And the cross is one of them.
All right, let's say from Professor Kombo, we'll come to you, David.
We talked about stoning, lynching, vis-a-vis the cross, and what is it that would then be special about one or the other? What is special about Jesus' case is that it is all the way from the Old Testament again. Jesus wouldn't have died another form of death. The Old Testament would be talking about hanging on a tree. This neck that we see in the Old Testament hanged on a tree, and bringing about the salvation of the people, so to speak.
Yes.
Would be, Jesus would then typify the same that we see, and so there's a seamless telling of the story, so that it's not just one incident, but several incidences that are seen and working together towards the fulfillment of a bigger narrative that's there. So I just wanted to say that
Yes.
you cannot talk about any other possibility of Jesus's death except the tree.
The tree.
Except the tree.
Right. Let's welcome to you, Martin.
If I may
Yep.
just
Yes.
put it in everyday language, which Jesus, the Messiah, actually used when he was addressing the people. He really spoke in a common man's language, new stories. And one of the stories that addresses the question you've asked is, he says there was an owner of a vineyard, and he rented it out to some people and told them, this is the vineyard, these are the expectations concerning the vineyard, and I expect you to deliver to me my rent. And then they wouldn't deliver the rent, and he sent his representatives. And each time he sent a representative, they beat the representatives up, cast them out. They said, I'm going to send them my son. So that this time when I send them my servant, my son, they will respect who that person is and who he represents, and hear what I'm saying. The people in the vineyard saw the son coming, and they said, let us kill this one, then we will inherit this vineyard. And so they put him to death. Now this parable was told both in the Old and the New Testament. It is pointing to the fact that the servant that God of Israel brought to Israel was sent to a people who already were in violation of the covenant that they had entered into. That's why they are actually under the rule of the Roman Empire. They were already under they had been conquered by the Romans, before that by the Greeks and others, because of violating that covenant. So if we keep this dichotomy of segregating, as Professor keeps saying, you cannot make sense of what is in the renewed covenant when you segment it away from the old, because the people there were in violation. So by their violation and by their conquerors, the perfect God saw that these people would act in this manner. And that's why he allowed his son to be subjected. It's not saying that he was doing something wrong. He was allowing the wrongness of the people to become a testimony against them by their refusal to do what is right. He said, okay, I know you are a people who want to do what is right, so I will bring you the innocent one, the truth himself, and you will put him to death. But I have a bigger plan in work. So what they did at that time was located in that environment of their nation and their crucifixion. But its ramifications were global.
All right.
They were to spread throughout the earth. They even impacted time. That's why we have the division of time between before him and after him.
Right. Maybe also you've given me a perfect template for my questioning. Maybe the violation that I'd actually proffered and hanged it with God does not really augur well with most of you. But does then God use the wrongness of the people to fulfill his purpose? That's the question that I wanted. And I think that's a nice framing that you've given me this morning. Martin, does he use the wrongness of the people? And then people will ask also, does God allow evil then?
No,
right?
you see, Debarl, what God is doing is very provocative. What God has done is that he knows he has given man laws, and that man has decided to follow those laws at the expense of following him. So he confronts these laws, and he confronts them at their own comfort zone. So for instance, he tells them, oh, so what is the greatest commandment out of the 10? And they want to go through 1, 2, 3. He says, but fine, you can go through all these things, but the one thing that you need to get to fulfill this is love. So what God is then doing is removing the dogmatic approach to worship or to following the rules, to now raising them to a higher spiritual level. And this is why I keep saying that, when you look at this from the mystery of Christ and the cross, then you look at the three things happening at the same time. There's humanity on one end, following a text they believe is coming from God, and God himself challenging them on their own understanding and finding them wanting. And for that very reason, he brings himself to their level, which again they defy and even negate, and proceed to do what they believe best. They are following their laws because they are saying this guy is defying, Jesus is defying, and they'll go ahead and punish him or convict him to death. So basically what God is doing with this whole process is actually proving the lack of wisdom, the preoccupation of man by laws and rules, and lifting them away from that and creating a new understanding in them. So every time we look at this interplay, we are seeing God at work himself, you are seeing the Spirit at work, and you are seeing mankind at work. And mankind remains fallible and remains weak as they are until Christ's own blood and all salvation lifts them. So this is really what is at play. So again, when you look at it holistically, we have the picture. But when we just want to see the wrongness or the shortcomings, then again we fail to see God fulfilling himself through those very actions.
All right. Maybe the other question that, unless Dola, I saw you also straining out the list to say something very briefly. I'll give you that opportunity.
Yes, very briefly. I wanted to say also one thing, that what we are looking at, it was really not a trial as such. This thing was fixed.
Kangaroo court.
Kangaroo.
Yeah.
And then the governor had been called. There's a message which had been earlier sent to the governor. Unakumbuka? And then he says there's somebody there who is creating a lot of trouble. Find a way how you can sort him out. And then he was, I think it is in that framework that he was just being sorted out. But the issue which I was raising is the sorting out. Was it lawful for the judge to entertain the case? Was it lawful for him to enter conviction?
Thank you.
And that is the issue.
And
so the law, the issue of the law is what I'm addressing. And my case is that it was not lawful because the judge says, I have no jurisdiction.
Thank you. And I think we've established from all the panelists that yes, that God used that particular unlawfulness to fulfill his own purpose. Right, that he actually had to use that particular opportunity to make sure that yes, what he had been prophesied before will come to fruition.
Place, yes.
Yeah. So it was sort of an orchestration that yes, God will use this particular unlawfulness, so to speak, to also advance his agenda of redeeming a man.
And then there was one thing which I was saying. Even then, it was done, and then it was unlawful. And then the case of Joan of Arc, if you look at it, the president that the main president that I have, it's exactly the same.
It is exactly, but I don't.
And that one was set aside. It was set aside because of the same same scenario.
Because if we try to broach that particular subject right now, I don't know, we won't really have the time to actually drill deeper into it. Because also at the end of the day, we don't want also to confuse our viewers. We want to bring clarity and make it very limpid for them on what we're talking about, right? And how Jesus was subjected through this and fairness and all. But what is the redeeming element of this conversation also for us this morning? Then, Professor,
I have a problem with the term orchestrate.
Orchestrate.
Because it could mean one of two things. It could mean that he sneaked behind some people. The way people like to see, God shouldn't have done it, but he did it. Or we could take it positively and say he worked like a conductor of an orchestra. And so I take the second.
So he was manipulative. So
that's even worse.
That's
because
even worse.
You see manipulation and the discourse has to be right. I used the word sovereign before because we have all accepted the finitude of man.
Yes.
And we have accepted that man has a problem with pain. God doesn't have a problem with pain. And so the crucifixion of Christ becomes an illegality, an injustice, and so on the basis of our perspective as human beings because we don't like pain, we don't like death. But through that death, God accomplishes something really superior. And I just said that it's not the only time. And Wakili said that this was the first documented time. I could go back to Haman and the book of Esther, where there was just about to have a miscarriage. It was signed and sealed by the king. So, and I can go back to Genesis 4, where the first murder occurs, and God has dialogue with Cain. But what I'm saying is that just the way God can intervene in nature, in the case of miracles and so on, he has the sovereign capacity to take what is unpleasant for us and use it for a higher good. And so what was seen as a curse, the cross was a curse,
yes.
Cursed anyone who hangs on the tree, becomes a blessing. Why? And this is what I would want everyone to see. You and I, anyone listening today, watching today, are the ones who are supposed to die. And so if Jesus died in our place, why we celebrate the crucifixion as something beneficent is because he took our place. We are the ones who are supposed to face the judge, the wrath of God. And so the thing would be, why would God set me free and have Jesus die in my place? So if I said nothing else, I would say this. This Easter, everyone viewing today needs some kind of introspection. Because the Bible says all of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And the wages of sin is death. So how Jesus becomes that penalty that takes our place, dying in our place so we don't have to die. If you ignore such a thing, I think there's something wrong. That would be a greater injustice for someone to die for you, and then you just look at it like, it was a mandazi bought next door. You can't ignore the death of Christ because it was for you and me. It was substitutionary. And if, like I said, that for me is critical. And every Kenyan, everyone watching NTV, wherever, I really think we must answer that question Jesus asked the disciples, who do men say I am? The Lamb of God who came to take away the sin of the world. Nobody can pretend here they have no sin. But the good news is that through that cross, sins can be forgiven. That's the gospel. God doesn't hate anybody. Many people think God hates them. No. God loves. He did not come into the world to condemn. He came. Yeah. So that's the gospel. And the gospel is he died for you and me.
That's the gospel. I think also it will be remiss of us if you don't really clarify, because also David raised pertinent questions at the beginning. First of all, the Jesus that we see portrayed on the screens, and you talked about the pigmentation. Was it white? Was it black? Was it Caucasian? Or was it Asian? That's the primary question that you're asking. And secondly, also the day of Easter, is it predicated on a pagan tradition that has actually been Christianized, so to speak? And what difference does it make also if, yes, this is Easter and we're celebrating Christ? Does it bring any discernible difference if this particular pagan tradition was pagan and it is maybe hanging on the same scale with Jesus? What would be the question? So is there any primary reason, and maybe for the purposes of clarification, people who have acted these particular movies, they've gone full steam ahead because no African has done this before. If maybe that he was, I'm not saying he was an African, but you can actually tell us because I think you guys have drilled deeper into the theology and study of this. So if we didn't have the resources, what would be wrong with a white pigmentation acting as or personifying himself as Jesus for the primary purposes, or for the primary purpose, I should say, of making sure the gospel is spread and people understand the gospel? Are we losing the bigger picture because of a very, I should say, I don't want to actually say minute or inconsequential, but are we losing the bigger picture because we're looking at, the small elements that create the bigger picture? David, before we come to you, Professor Yakubu, yeah, because he raised this.
Truth is the essence of everything. Truth is ultimately what reality is about, or life is about. And in fact, every person on a philosophical or religious platform predicates themselves as advancing the truth. Now, there's a continual priority in human history in a quest for the truth. This global quest for truth has seen many reform movements take place throughout history. So, for example, when you look in over the long term, you'll see that the forms of belief that have been associated with this person that was crucified have changed over time. And with the rise of the Roman Empire taking over the message pertaining to this person, that narrative changed. Things were added to it that may not have been pertinent or core to that prophetic and scriptural narrative. So Luther comes up and starts a process of saying, hey, people, there's some things here that actually we have integrated and added that are not part of this thing if we look at the scriptures. So he starts a process of reform. The Baptists come. There was a study that went and was a popular study centered on renovation called Renovare, which was go back to restoring the truth. Let's search what is the truth. And this is a continuing quest up to today. So the historical movements we know, Kina Luther, the Baptists, apologists, and many other forms that have come through history, they are contemporary movements taking place. And in fact, sometimes I ponder, why do we sit in our environment in a cocoon and not actually take note of what's happening globally? The process of questioning the dominant narratives, whether they are economic, whether they are scientific, whether they are political, and whether they are religious, is an expression of the human quest for the truth. And so there are, it's not a minor question. When you look at the contemporary movements that are taking place in the quest for truth, is what has made many people live a religious environment that is not willing to tolerate a question that goes to a core belief. Then you find a schism. And what ends up happening is that people end up breaking off because the place they were in is not willing to tolerate a question concerning something that has been core to our beliefs. So you find the house church, the apostolic movements, the messianic movements, the Hebrew movements emerge because of a desire to say, what is the pure, the one truth?
Thank you.
And that's what Truth Quest is about. It's about facilitating a conversation. In fact, if our bodies, denominations, or whatever were open to allowing discourse and conversation about core held beliefs, that question would be addressed. Is it pertinent that the person who was living in the scriptures is of a different race than what is represented in popular media?
But we're still saying, does God really use what is presented in the popular media, the wrongness that we are talking about, to actually make sure his narrative is actually displayed out there?
The question would be, does it help a wrong narrative or does it help the right narrative?
And I think also that we can subject that to another discussion on this particular forum with all of you as well, because of interest of time.
Questions.
We're open to those questions.
Yes.
But we'll be
answer them.
Yeah. So can we leave it pending, because I know we're really strapped for time. Can we leave it pending?
No, I don't think so. I mean,
very briefly, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Whether fora and media and so on can advance that kind of discourse, I think the media has done an excellent thing, and in providing the space, they could do more. But this morning is a testimony, is a witness that the narrative is getting out. But I just hitchhiking on what you had asked, I would say, yes, there are wrong narratives out there, but how do you tell they're wrong? By going back to the central narrative. And what's the central narrative? The scriptures.
Yes.
And so as much as we have all these opinions about truth, about justice, about law, and so on, if we're discussing Christ, we cannot do without the Gospels.
Right.
Because they're the primary documents.
Right. We have Dennis Manwari asking us a question here. He says, thanks for the program. Why did Jesus have to stay dead from Friday to Sunday? Why didn't he arise on Saturday? Martin.
The same question could be, why did he arise even on Friday itself? I guess that this is again where the scriptures are very clear in terms of what did Jesus have to go through. And again, it was clear that from the right from the word go, he would go through that process, and on the third day he would resurrect. And even when the resurrection itself was a problem,
yes,
remember, even among the disciples and the apostles, it took Jesus to manifest himself back in a human form to be able to again prove the same point.
Thank you. All right. Let's come to Professor Kombo, because before we went to David, you had something to say. I don't want to miss it. Very briefly.
There was the question of Easter,
yes,
and whether Easter was not just another holiday out there. Mm-hmm. Just to say that there are so many such stories which are behind the scriptural narratives.
Yes.
Even if you are to take the example of a covenant.
Yes.
You meet that as a concept out there among cultures that were not originally Jewish and so forth.
Yes.
But somehow those cultures get, those ideas get used.
Yes.
And they become part and parcel of the narrative. God uses them to convey very deep ideas, concepts, and so forth. But when you come to the story of Easter, yes, historically, this is not something that was practiced in the form in which we know it until around 325. And all of us are aware of the Nicaea and the meeting that happens in Nicaea in 325. And Christians at that time are now saying, look, we are not just going to ride on the Jewish Passover story. This incident is significant for us in a number of ways. So we are going to calculate.
Thank you.
And so we ended up with Easter fixed in the calendar, that of course one of the so-called movable holidays, Christian holidays, and of course when you begin to look at how it was arrived at, it's a fascinating, discussion. Right. How these things.
And we all agree there's a lot that we can talk about here. Yeah. And I think also David, thank you. That yes, we can begin this conversation and regularly try and broach these particular issues. Mm-hmm. Yes, and to just make it clear, when we'll ask, is Jesus the only person that will lead to heaven? Are there many roads that go to heaven? Yeah, and is Jesus primarily the person that can redeem mankind? These are pertinent questions that also our viewers will want to know. Many of them, they don't really allude to Easter, or they don't even observe Easter. We have Muslims. I mean, we have many religions: the Hindu, the Buddhism. We have Baha'i faiths. I mean, what do they believe? These are some of the things that we want to know. But because of interest of time, I think we'll leave it at this and just give you maybe 30 seconds to just give us your closing remarks, and of course, wish Kenyans a happy Easter. And I hope also this conversation also has been enlightening, opening our minds to see the primary purpose of Easter as well. Let's begin with you, Mr. Dola, very briefly, 30 seconds.
Very briefly, yes, I must say thank you. I must also thank the Holy Father, because in his Easter message of last year, he pointed to the fact that Jesus was not given a fair trial.
Oh, he did?
He did, yes. Mm. And what would have happened if Jesus was not crucified? Of course, the mission would not have been accomplished. That is why he was saying, at the end of the day, it is over.
Thank you. Right. 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. This discussion is an indication of the mystery of the cross, because as we sit here, we are asking questions and we seem to be talking even the more. What is clear for us is that it is Easter time. It's the time to remember the death of Jesus Christ, and with him our sins forgiven. So really enjoy Easter, and know that it's all about Jesus, not about the feast.
Right.